Um, Karen.
Good morning. Take two. Of all the people to mute, it was me. So there we go. I can now have got that out of the way. Good morning. Welcome to the second morning of the Virtual Patient Safety Congress. This morning, we are talking about learning from error. We will be looking at actioning the recommendations of the Cumberland Review, considering the long-term impacts of good engagement with patients and family after harm, and discussing learning after adverse events. As ever, the Patient Safety Congress is putting patients at the heart of patient safety. We have 3 representatives from patients. Even before COVID, public pride in the NHS was extraordinary. A King's Fund survey in 2018 found that 90% of the public supported the founding principles of the NHS, and 66% said they would be willing to pay more through their own taxes to fund it. But nothing demonstrates our belief in the NHS better than the trust that patients and their families place in hospitals up and down the country every day. This continues to be vividly shown during COVID, with families trusting clinicians with the care of desperately ill loved ones who they are unable to visit. COVID has also demonstrated the exceptional bravery of staff and their commitment to caring for patients. When people are drawing up wills before they go into work, the word frontline takes on an altogether more somber meaning. Healthcare professionals should be appreciated and valued. They should be fairly rewarded, and we need to be conscious of the support they may need. I'm sure I'm not the only person frustrated by the talk of bed spaces and indeed hospitals, as if these are entirely independent of the number of doctors and nurses. And while deliveries of donuts are good for morale, I'm not convinced the talk of heroism is actively helpful to clinicians. Does it make it harder for people to speak about the strain they're under? Does it make it harder to admit a mistake? Does it give people further to fall? Clinicians are also human. Our pride in having a system with the founding principles of the NHS does not mean we can afford to dissociate from anything and everything which challenges the perception of the overall good that the NHS does. When we think about what patients want, more than anything, they want safe care. Being as they are in a strange environment, patients are very aware of when they do and don't feel safe. And just as when a clinician doesn't feel safe, they probably aren't, when a patient doesn't feel safe, they probably aren't either. It's not a bad barometer. We now acknowledge the hierarchy gradient in the operating theatre, but clinicians need to be aware that the patient experiences that hierarchy from the moment they enter a healthcare setting. They're not on neutral ground. They're not equal in terms of skill and knowledge, and they have to place extraordinary trust in people who may be complete strangers. This is possibly why patients place such great value on communication. It is communication which allows them to orientate themselves in this unfamiliar world. Good communication has been demonstrated to improve health outcomes and patient satisfaction, to reduce error, misunderstandings, distress, and negligence claims. Of course, it is as much about listening as it is about talking, and listening is a key theme for us today. At its most simple, listening builds rapport, and showing a patient this respect helps earn their trust. But without listening, clinicians lose a vital source of information, whether from the patient themselves or their family. Hearing what is said and how contributes to a clinician's situational awareness. It may alert them to check something just in time. From studying human factors, we know there are a number of heuristics which can lull someone into making errors. We can talk about attribution error, fixation error, confirmation bias. Most can be countered with active listening. Listening is key for patient safety. All too often, there is a failure to listen to patients at the time when things go wrong. but also too often, there is a failure to listen in the aftermath of error. Over the last decade, there have been so many patient safety investigations. In every case, patients struggle to get their concerns heard. Organizations' determination to protect their reputations hobbles their ability to listen and to learn. The Cumberland Review comments on a healthcare system which is disjointed, siloed, unresponsive, and defensive. It does not adequately recognize that patients are its sole purpose. It has failed to listen to their concerns. As each new investigation is published, people who've been involved in patient safety for a while immediately notice the common themes which emerge. Bill Kirkup's excellent talk for Patient Safety Congress in 2018 about the common themes he'd observed during investigations is still available online. I recommend watching it. Every word remains relevant. One thing that makes me uneasy is that women seem to be disproportionately represented. The 3 disparate interventions investigated by the Cumberland Report involved women. Every investigation into maternity care involves care of women. Failure to heed what is labeled maternal anxiety is often cited in cases involving children. The experience which brought me into patient safety was a failed neuraxial block for a C-section. Themes which the Cumberland Report identified resonate with me. Dismissal at the time, difficulty getting concerns heard, a lack of data. The list goes on. But of course, I'm talking about obstetric anesthesia, so again, the care of women. I've often commented, somewhat glibly, that if anesthesia for vasectomies was a problem, it would have been sorted out years ago. And I'm sorry, because I probably made every man shift in his seat. But please note, this is not a comment against men, because some of the worst things said to women are said by women. So my concern is whether, as a society, we're not very good at listening to women. Is it such an implicit bias that we don't even notice? Does a lazy stereotype of women being more sensitive to pain mean that there's less attention paid to it? That shouldn't be the case because, as McCaffrey wrote, pain is whatever the patient experiencing it says it is. Quite simply, if a patient reports pain, they should be believed. When pain is the result of an intervention going wrong, to not be believed is to add insult to injury. Like most patient advocates, speaking about my experience was never going to change the outcome for me. I did it because I feared for those who might be more vulnerable than I had been, girls who were too young, women for whom English isn't their first language, women who'd experienced rape or abuse. Gender aside, these are all factors which can apply to men. And it bears remembering that we have 22% of the British population worn down by living in poverty. There are so many people for whom life is already tough enough, whose circumstances may be compounding factors which affect their health. It should not be the case that anyone's experience of healthcare might add to those factors. But for the women harmed with pelvic mesh implants and for the children of those prescribed sodium valproate and Primidose, it is the case that they were. Moreover, damage from patient safety incidents is far more pervasive than perhaps we've wanted to acknowledge, because just as pain is as the person experiencing it, so too is trauma as the individual experiences it. And patients carry this with them. Adverse experiences in healthcare affect people's willingness to access healthcare in the future, both for themselves and their families. Moreover, they may encounter in trauma after trauma as they attempt to navigate a defensive system, trying to get recognition of harm and an apology. There is understanding of the emotional and psychological needs of doctors as second victims after adverse events, but generally it is only the physical needs of patients which are considered. Later this morning, we're going to hear from Jo Hughes, who, on founding the Harmed Patients Alliance with James Titcombe, wrote, "When we lost our children, we needed truth and compassion. We needed care to be given to us that kept our suffering to a minimum and gave us hope of recovering as best we could from tragedy. What a patient wants and needs when something goes wrong is the clinician's humility and willingness for candor. For it is these things which are vital for ensuring the patient gets the continuity of care they deserve. While important, statutory duty of candor can get in the way of this. In describing the series of steps that organisations are legally obliged to follow in the event of qualifying incidents, hospital trusts will understandably focus on whether an incident meets the threshold for the statutory duty of candour and then the legal implications of that. And dare I say it, the financial implications too. But while the primary reaction is one of defence, the opportunity for learning from patients is lost to an adversarial system, where arguably lawyers are the only winners. Instead of reacting defensively, we need organisations to respond with compassion and curiosity. Compassion and working to help patients beyond their experience of harm, and curiosity in listening to gain insight for improvements and learning. Multiple national reports in the past decade have clearly articulated the importance of patient engagement. And as Vincent and Davis wrote, patients are privileged witnesses of healthcare in the sense that they are at the centre of the treatment process, and unlike individual clinical staff, they observe almost the whole process of care. It makes sense to make use of patients' insights. Moreover, we need to pay more attention to the cases which aren't catastrophic, not least because a close call is a warning, or the first case presenting a complication which seems exceptional may flag a serious safety issue. If medicine is both art and science, after harm, the art is in the human interaction. The science is in asking why. Medics start out as scientists. They were the children who always asked their parents why. But how many clinicians fail to ask that basic question for the women who suffered as a result of the 3 interventions investigated in the Cumberledge Review? It wasn't one failure, but many. Moreover, as the report comments, the fact is that the healthcare system does not know the scale of the problems we were asked to investigate. It is flying blind. There are many reasons to be on the case looking at unexpected complications, not least the evidence that randomized control trials are not always the gold standard we expect. Due to the enormous financial interests involved in the development and marketing of medicines and devices, industry has reason to influence medical research and practice. There is consistent evidence that industry does influence evidence-based production, understanding of harms issues, evaluations of cost effectiveness, and healthcare professional education. The benefits of treatments are often exaggerated and their potential harms are downplayed. Decisions may end up in the industry's favor, but not in patients' interests. Moreover, last month, the Anesthesia Journal published an overview of their editorial experience probing the datasets for submitted randomized control trials. They looked at the submitted papers for all 526 trials considered by the journal over 3 years, and they obtained individual level data from the authors of 153 trials. Of the 153 trials examined in depth, 44% were deemed to be false. This is not a problem specific to anesthesia. As a specialty, they've embraced patient safety. It is to their credit, they are actively detecting research fraud. My point is that both healthcare organizations and clinicians need to be aware of the limits to the data. You may not have it, or it may be inaccurate. However, patients experience the outcomes of their care and they live with the consequences. Actively listening to the concerns of patients could have real impact in patient safety. Patients may not be experts, but they are the experts in their experience. They have insight you don't. Listening is key for patient safety. Thank you. Now, before we get going with the first sessions, I do have a few housekeeping notes. Hopefully everyone has found their way around the virtual conference center, but if you need technical assistance, the help desk is on the virtual ground floor of the virtual lobby. Please do look at our partner resources in the exhibition hall. Anything you select will be stored in your delegate bag until you're ready to download it. During sessions, you can comment and ask questions in the box by the live panel window. Please do. And we're using the hashtag HSJ Patient Safety on Twitter. You'll be sent a link after the event to access all of the recordings from today. Finally, you may notice that our timing allows for a 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock. Thank you. So let's get going with the first session. It is an honor to be joined this morning by Baroness Cumberledge, the chair of the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review, Jo Gander, Clinical and Product Assurance Director at NHS Supply Chain, Dr. Aidan Fowler, National Director of Patient Safety for NHS England and NHS Improvement, as well as Deputy Chief Medical Officer for the Department of Health and Social Care, and Susan Morgan, a patient representative. The Congress team have been very aware there are thousands of women who could speak today, but to manage a lot wider discussion, we have only time for the one, and I'm very grateful to Susan for joining us. Susan, could you please start us off?
Thank you very much, Susanna, and I'm really honoured to be here with you all. This is a very brief outline of my now 11-year medical journey with visits to as many consultants. But I am just one voice amongst many thousands that have suffered like me from avoidable harm, exposed to years of gaslighting and lack of transparency. And whilst I am no expert, I am intellectually curious and extremely aware of my own body and what is happening to it. And so it is for all patients. They are the ones experiencing the harm and they must be listened to. I feel it is vitally important that the accumulation of individual patients' voices and experiences are heard and believed. For it is only then that we can move forward to a safer patient experience future, where the consent process must be clear and precise to assist patient understanding. I know only too well the shock of what it is like to wake in severe pain after having been told the procedure would be simple and minimally invasive. I felt as though something had bulldozed my pelvis into a million agonizing pieces. In the half wake after general anaesthetic, one's mind starts to compute at high speed. This should not be happening. This pain was not explained to me during consultation. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Questions and computations rattled through my mind like a high-speed runaway train. I was in a private hospital, the fire door shut tight, no one to be seen, and all alone. I thought to myself, things can't be too bad because if they were, someone would be with me. I tried to convince myself that I would be okay and that the pain would soon pass. I felt the need to go to the bathroom, but I was totally unaware that I had been administered a caudal block during surgery. This was something I discovered some years later. So unaware of the spinal block and having not been warned, I decided to go to the bathroom alone. As my feet touched the ground, my legs gave way and I blacked out. Upon awakening, I tried to get up, but I couldn't move my legs. I used my arms to drag myself to the bathroom to find the emergency cord, which reached the floor. I managed enough strength to pull the cord and the staff came to help. It was some years later that I discovered I had been alone and unconscious on the floor for 2 hours. So beyond the smart and comfortable reception facade, the private hospital was revealing a very different story. My groin was excessively black and swollen. I was in shock, and the nursing staff were baffled and confused as they struggled to insert catheters. By the second day, my screaming and crying was increasing as my pelvic agony increased. I was given morphine, and many ice packs the size of pillows were wrapped around my pelvis. It was evident that something was wrong. On the third day after surgery for an apparent minimally invasive procedure, I was told I would be discharged. Although seriously unwell, I was glad to go home to my mother. But unfortunately, I deteriorated fast and the pain increased so much my screams became unconsolable. My mother rang the hospital and the staff calmly said, "Just drive her back." My brother carried me to his car as I screamed. Back at the hospital, I was examined for the first time since the surgery 3 days earlier, and an enlarging pelvic hematoma was identified adjacent to a bladder extended to 1500 mils. I was rushed for emergency surgery, and this was just the beginning of what has been a most appalling journey. So who was Susan Morgan only 3 days before this nightmare unfolded? It is a question that I feel some hesitance to answer, as it is with all mesh-injured women. We have sadly had to say goodbye to who we once were. But I had been a very happy, proactive mummy, responsible for 2 gorgeous little girls. I was also a successful businesswoman of 30 years, with a thriving CQC registered skin clinic. I was, and always had been, a very happy and positive woman, but I was now unable to walk, sit, or stand upright, and there was an ever-growing realization that I was now a danger to my own patients when I attempted to work. I broke down emotionally with the shock of it all, and I was advised to strike off my business. Everything I had pioneered was gone. The shock of such losses to patients has a profound impact on their mental health. Many, if not all of us, diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, living in financial ruin, suicidal ideation ever present. Sadly, some did not make it through. But somehow, through all this, I felt I had to try to understand what went wrong, to write and to complain. But the complaints process is a minefield, almost impossible to navigate whilst so ill. Unknown acronyms are everywhere: MHRA, SAR, NICE, etc. It is nigh on impossible for many harmed patients to know where to begin with this, when all they really want is someone to understand, to sympathise, and to just try and correct what has gone wrong. The impact of harm is not just on the patient, it affects their children, husbands, partners, and mothers. Family members look on at their loved ones screaming in pain, not knowing what to do to help. I was lucky. My mother was my saviour in every way one could be saved, and my daughters were my angels. From a child's perspective, my youngest daughter wrote in 2015, "At the age of 12, to have to hear your mother wail in pain day in and day out, and to have to see her on such a reduced personal level as she was unable to go to the toilet without assistance, left me in shock, not only because I felt I had become a parental figure at such a young age, but also that such derogatory harm could be caused to my wonderful mum." I would like to finish by saying that I hope the much needed and wonderful recommendations written in the Cumberlish report are expedited, and that professional people give the help that patients need in a comprehensive strategy to help them deal with their tragically injured lives. Patients must be listened to, as they have the right to express themselves fully. Understanding the full range of lost quality of life cannot be identified merely by tick box policy. It takes a compassionate human being to listen fully to another human being that is harmed and suffering.
Susan, thank you so much for speaking with such grace and dignity, and also for talking about the power differential that people actually experience when wanting to raise their concerns. Could we now please go to Julia? Would you like to take over, Julia?
Hello, good morning. Can I also say thank you to Susan, because I know the huge amount of work that she does supporting other people who are in dire straits, and her energy and her courage are absolutely outstanding, as are so are many of the other patients who help other patients. And one of the things that has been outstanding is the work of the patient groups. And I would like to thank them so much for the work they do for others. I just want to say that I sit here before you, a person who's actually been shaken by the experience of personally listening to over 700 women and their families damaged by the healthcare system. Their testimonies really haunt me, and their bravery impels me to right their wrongs. So I'm going to ask you today to give your support to the change that we have written in our report called First Do No Harm, because we see this as the future. We were commissioned to examine and research 2 medications, Primados, a hormone pregnancy test taken between the 1950s and the 1970s. And it is associated with terrible damage to newborn babies. And those babies now have grown up, of course, and they're adults needing care and support. The second was sodium valproate, a very effective medication to control epilepsy. But when taken in pregnancy, it has a 50% chance of a severely handicapped child being born. Even today, that medication is still being given to women who are unaware of the consequences. And the third area was different, not a medication, a device, pelvic mesh, which is a plastic net which can migrate, disintegrate, wrap itself around vital organs, severing some and causing appalling damage and harm to those individuals. The root cause was the failure of the healthcare system, the system as a whole, and by some of the medical profession who ignored the concerns of women and their families. These women knew what was wrong, but they were dismissed. They were told it was all in their heads, just a woman's problem, not to be taken seriously. And I have to say, this made me very cross. As Sir Cyril Chandler, the Review's Vice Chairman, reminded us, for whom is the health system run? We pay for it. It is ours. It is run for us, the people, the patients. And of course, you know, and I know, we all know, when we are ill or in pain, most doctors will listen. But if they sense a mistake has been made, they clam up, become defensive, act irrationally. Now for the good news. The report has raised a clarion call for action. And I really would like to thank all those who have been so supportive, particularly, of course, the patients and their groups, and the colleges, the Royal College of Surgeons, College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the physicians, the general practitioners, and the British Society of Urogynecologists, all of those with a medical membership, and the BMJ. The BMJ has been stunning in its editorials and articles. All these and so many more want to see our recommendations implemented. They want a safer future for them and for their children. By good fortune, we have a bill in the House of Lords, and it is in the committee stage. And I've put down a shoal of amendments, all referring to the view and its report, First Do No Harm. We have 9 key recommendations in our report. The first has been agreed. We asked the Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, and the Minister, Nadine Dorries, to give an apology to all those so grievously harmed. We asked for that, and they gave it. But that leaves us with 8 recommendations to achieve. The most important, we feel now, is the implementation of the Independent Patient Safety Commissioner. A voice for patients, a listener to patients. If a product raises concern, that commissioner must say, stop, this is a worry. We need to investigate, to research, ensure safety. Better have a few false alarms than the tragedies that we have witnessed that cost lives, suffering, family breakups, damaged children, personal costs beyond price, millions of pounds to be paid from the public purse. So we need a person of standing, outside the healthcare system, accountable to Parliament, the patient's port of call, the person who holds the system to account and encourages and requires the healthcare system to act. So what is this system? We are talking about the regulators, the NHS private providers, professional bodies, pharma and device manufacturers, policymakers, including politicians and all those involved in healthcare. We see the Safety Commissioner as the golden thread tying this disjointed system together in the interests of those who matter most, the patients. The patients have told us time and again, it is wrong that we, sick and suffering people, should have to join these dots. And I know Susan has fought very hard about the system of complaints, a system which people find impossible to get to grips with and who to go to when they have a problem. Our other recommendations include redress for those who suffer now and a redress agency for the future. The legal system, going to court, doesn't serve patients well. We need an alternative. We recommended a network of specialist centres to provide comprehensive treatment, care and advice for those affected by MESH and separately for those affected by the medications taken in pregnancy which have caused harm. Also, we want a substantial revision of the MHRA, the regulator, and already I know things are in progress on that score. We ask for a central database and registries, so we no longer fly blind. We fly blind because we don't have the essential information to provide safer services and good research. We want the GMC to be more transparent in doctors' interests. We were told by Professor Carl Hennigan, he said, I think it's important that if I am treating you, you should know who is paying me. And finally, we need a task force to take our report forward. I'm impatient, and I have said to the government, if this government and the healthcare system ignores our review and another medication or medical device damages people to the extent we have witnessed, they will and should not be forgiven. Since we are having no communication with the department at the moment, we are establishing a parliamentary group called First Do No Harm. It's all party, it crosses all sections, including in my house, the people who have no political affiliations. Its purpose is to ensure that all our recommendations are implemented. And we are trying to open up a firmly shut departmental door, a department which doesn't seem to get it. And I think safety cannot dally. We need action. Simply asking everyone as they are now to work together better, we think will not work any more than it has in the past. If they really care about safety and want to prevent the tragedies we have witnessed, we do need someone and something new. An independent patient safety commissioner. And finally, Susan, I just would like to say, you know, innovation and technology will bring exciting change. There is potential to do so much good, but we must ensure the risks of increasing complex healthcare are understood. Where the system is not sure of the risks, it must say so. Had it done so, in our 3 interventions, I am sure that so much anguish, suffering, and many ruined lives could have been avoided. So we believe our recommendations will improve the lives of people who have been harmed and make the system safer in the future. Implementations need to be approached with a new urgency and determination founded on the guiding principle that our healthcare system must first do no harm. After that, of course, it must do some good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. That was superb. And all of the recommendations are so very welcome to those of us who've been watching various things unfold over the years. Could I now pass over to Jo, please?
Hi. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the panel, and just to acknowledge the work that Baroness Cumberledge is doing, and obviously the presentation by Susan as well, which I think went to all of our hearts. From my perspective, I work obviously within NHS supply chain, and I'm really, really passionate about improving things, well, the experience of care for patients as well as carers. And that's actually what brought me into the role that I'm in currently. I am a nurse by background, and I've worked across the health and care system as well as in industry over my career. But what brings me to work every day in my current role is in the hope that I can make a difference for patients and carers who are experiencing care through our NHS every day. And the small part that we can contribute to that really is in developing the procurement frameworks and making products that are available and ensuring that they are fit for purpose, safe, and represent end user needs. So a key part to the work that we've been doing since the operating model, the new operating model a couple of years ago, is trying to ensure that we do work in partnership across the health and care system with colleagues such as Aidan in NHS ENI, but also with wider partners across the system that are involved with medical devices and obviously bringing things to the market. Central to that, obviously, though, is the engagement with end users, so that any of their experiences inform the work that we're doing, as well as the health and care professionals that use those products in their work. And I know, Susanna, you mentioned around human factors, which is a core part of the work that we do in developing what we call essential specifications for products that we bring to the NHS. So for me, all of those things are really central to ensuring that we do meet expectations of patients and health and care professionals, and actually do our bit to try and improve things. What I would say as well is that, you know, when you look at innovations, and I agree with what Baroness Cumberledge was saying around, you know, there's an awful lot of opportunities for new innovations coming to the NHS, but from our perspective, again, we look at how we build that into an essential specification and ensure that they meet the relevant not only regulations but criteria around human factors and usability factors to make sure that they're safe, and that we have the required amount of evidence and support with the people who are using them to ensure that they're actually are bringing some benefits, and that we can share that as part of the process. So we've got consistency not only for products that are already in the system, but also for new products that are actually coming to market as well. Something that I'm really, really proud of that we've developed within supply chain, and my team have supported in delivering, is something that we call Siren, which is a safety intervention when there are any safety concerns raised from our customers. And basically what that means is if there is a safety concern raised, we actually risk stratify it when it comes in, and respond accordingly and engage with our wider partners to ensure that if it is something that affects other partners within the NHS, they're fully aware of that as well, as quickly as possible, and we can have a system-wide response for things like that. What we, and in most cases, it's usually something very, very basic, like a batch problem, which can be dealt with relatively quickly. But where the level of risk justifies it, then we escalate that and engage our partners accordingly. So that's something that we've done relatively recently to try and improve things and actually be more responsive, especially when we're and listening to the people who are using the products in the daily care with patients. So really, from my perspective, what we're hoping to do is to ensure we get the engagement of health and care professionals who are using products that we provide through NHS supply chain every day, and ensuring that they communicate with us if they do have concerns, if there are any issues that they come across, so that we can actually build that into future procurement plans and ensure that that is integral into the work that we do in improving things, and also driving quality from a product perspective, but also in being able to work with our partners in improving the way that we deliver services and care in the NHS. That's really, I think I'm probably a little bit early for a change, Suzanne, but I don't think there's really much more that I can say following that.
So fantastic, Jo, thank you very much. And it just gives us more time for questions, which will be very gratefully received. Could I now pass on to Aidan Fowler? Aidan.
Good morning, all. And firstly, I'd just like to start with some acknowledgements. We live in extraordinary times, and I just wanted to acknowledge the amount of work that staff have been doing around COVID, which has had a huge impact on all of us, and to acknowledge that this has been a difficult experience for families and patients, but also for those staff. I want to acknowledge, before I start to talk about Valprade, the impact that it has had on some mothers, patients and their children. That is why we're doing the work, but also to thank Baroness Julia Cumberledge and Sir Cyril Chandler for the enormous amount of work they've done in producing their important report, First Do No Harm, to which we are responding and talking about today. And to you, I notice now, and it's increasing all the time, that over 400 of you have chosen to join us today virtually, and I'm sorry we can't all be together for those extra important conversations that we might normally have, but that just indicates to me how important you feel this is, and that you've taken the time and trouble to listen. What I wanted to talk to you about in the main was sodium valproate. So this is the part of the report that I've become most intimately involved in, having been asked for NHS E&I to lead on our work around sodium valproate. This is a drug that's been around for a long time, and we've also known for a long time that it was teratogenic, and we know now much better that it has the potential to cause both physical harm, but also significant neurodevelopmental disorders when taken during pregnancy. It's also, however, a very effective drug for some conditions and in some patients. And therein lies the difficulty, is that balance of risk. And we have to acknowledge that for a small number of people, it is the drug, either the only drug that works, or the drug that works most effectively for conditions that have a huge impact on their lives. But we recognize the risks in pregnancy are very great. And we know in safety thinking that the ideal thing for something that we consider dangerous is to eliminate it. And there are those out there who have called for a ban of the drug. Some fairly high profile people in the system have said, why wouldn't we ban it? And in many ways, that would be the easiest thing to do, but we can't do that for good reasons that I'll come on to. But therefore, we have to consider how we substitute it in those that we can, and we believe that more people are taking it than essentially should. And then in those who need to take it, how we make sure that there are protections in place, and necessarily we will need to have multiple layers, because we know that in each layer there may be gaps and there may be risk. What would happen if we banned it? Well, patients, for some patients, it is the only drug that controls their epilepsy. They would have breakthrough seizures, they would be banned from driving, this would have significant impacts on their lives, and that they would be left at, we believe, an increased risk of sudden death in epilepsy and so on, and potentially for some people with severe psychosis, bipolar conditions, they would be left with poorer management of their condition. So that's why we believe there will still be groups of patients for whom it's most effective. Some severe conditions in childhood, it is very effective, etc. So we have not waited for this report to start thinking about this, and we have been thinking very carefully, and we can't do anything sudden because of the complexity of it, but we have been thinking very carefully about what the opportunities are. We have a group looking at this that has clinicians from different groups, pediatrics, neurology, from psychiatry, as you would expect, but also patients. And there are obviously patients who believe that we shouldn't use this drug, and there are patients whose lives they feel depend on it and who should. And we have to take a balanced view of that. And we are looking for the options for how we can make improvements in this drug. So firstly, thinking about prescribing and deprescribing, importantly deprescribing for some, and how this drug and when this drug is initiated, and what barriers can be put into its use where not essentially needed, and working with groups like NICE and the Committee on Human Medicines, as you might expect, to narrow as much as possible the indications for which this drug is used. And also to ensure that as part of the licensing, people have annual reviews and monitoring, that when Valprade is dispensed, that it's dispensed in packaging with warnings, that we link somehow the dispensing to the use of contraception, and think very carefully around how we increase patient empowerment and information, because we know that up to 20% of patients taking the medication do not understand the risks in pregnancy still. So there is a huge gap there, and we know how we communicate is incredibly important. So a single word can make a difference. We talked recently about how saying to somebody, you cannot get pregnant on this drug, means one thing to one person and a different thing to others. So it can be interpreted as meaning it has a contraceptive effect and therefore you won't get pregnant on it, where what we may mean is you should not get pregnant on this drug. So even one word can make a huge difference in communication terms. So we need to improve that. So there is a series of steps that we will take. And when we have agreed all those appropriate steps, we have undertaken that we will write out to those of childbearing age who are on this medication to explain all of that as clearly as possible and in detail, to make steps to improve the safety around this medication, because we believe that can be done. Now, it is very difficult for us to decide, and I come from a quality improvement background where an aim should be specified. We should say, what is the number? We know that over 15,000 people currently of childbearing age are taking this medication. We don't know for sure what the baseline level of that that's most appropriate, i.e. how many people essentially need to take this drug, but we believe it's much lower, potentially a third of that number, who would need necessarily for good clinical reasons to continue on this medication. So firstly, we believe that much fewer people need to be on it. And then we have a smaller cohort of patients for whom those barriers and protections need to be in place. So it's a complex area, it's an important area. We have not gone far enough. We need to support clinicians to go further with this, but also support patients whose lives are improved by this medication whilst protecting the unborn child from the risk of it. Thank you.
Aidan, thank you very much for such a thorough and balanced response. There are so many factors to consider in any of these situations, and it's really important, as you say, for women coming forward in the future that it's considered so thoroughly. We have time for questions, which is absolutely brilliant. Thank you to all the speakers for sticking to time. They're amazing. First of all, though, I've been asked to put to you the audience, an audience poll with this question: would you be interested in attending a webinar to learn more about the national safety initiatives the NHS supply chain is involved in? So that, I hope, is going to be coming up on your screens, and you'll be able to access that. In the meantime, though, if I could put a couple of questions to the panel. First of all, Joe, this is, I think, possibly quite a nice short one. Simply, do you have human factors professionals in the team at NHS Supply?
We have, within my team, we have product assurance specialists that are clinicians, and one of them particularly has been involved in the work of human factors. So rather than them being experts themselves, we engage with the human factors teams that are part of the system as well. So it's not that the whole idea for us is, rather than us bringing everyone in, we're trying to connect with the expertise that's already out there. And obviously there's quite a lot of expertise around human factors, so we're trying to use that to inform everything that we do. But yes, we've got one of my team is particularly connected with the human factors agenda.
Fantastic, thank you. Two related questions for you, Julia. One being, it's rather direct, why do you believe the government response to the recommendations of the report appears to have been so lacklustre? And then the related question to me being, what do you hope to achieve with the cross-party group?
Well, thank you very much indeed. Susanna, we have been disappointed because we hoped by now at least we would have some sort of inclination about what is going on. And I do want to thank very much what Aidan has been saying and the work that he's been doing on sodium valproate. But, you know, even now we know women are not being told the dangers that they can, that they undertake in taking this. And it's how to make them really aware. And one of the things that, because we know the women who are of childbearing age who are taking sodium valproate, it is possible for perhaps NHS England to send a reminder to those women and a copy to their GP, because we need 100% coverage and we're not getting it. And we know women are really still unaware and taking this medication without knowing the consequences. And the risks need to be made plain to them. And then if they choose to continue, that is up to them. That is their decision. But consent is necessary. And I just sort of think we could be doing more actually on sodium valproate. The response from the department on the other 8 areas, the key recommendations, has been woeful. And the reason they give all the time is that, well, there's a terrible lot of work to do. You took 2.5 years to produce your report, and we need a lot of time in order to consider it and come back to you. But I have to say, Scotland already has accepted the report. Scotland, of course, are the things that are relevant to them, and things like the MHRA is UK-wide, but things that are relevant to them, and they are going to appoint a patient safety commissioner. They can go ahead. Why are we so slow? I mean, this is an English report. We have done it in England, and Scotland are going ahead with it. And I've been invited to Australia, New Zealand, God knows where else to go and talk about it. And I'm not going, it's too far away, I'm not going. But I have to say, other people have taken notice and see merit in this. And yet we have had not a whisper from the Department of Health what they're actually doing, except, of course, what Aidan has been telling us about sodium valproate. So one of the things that was really interesting in the report was that we were looking at 3 different areas, but as we were looking at them, we saw this enormous cross-reference across the whole healthcare system. And we could see that although we were looking at 3 specifics, there were a lot of things that were common to all. And I think one of the most interesting chapters is the one about the read across. What you can see is happening to the whole system. And that is why we talk about the healthcare system. Of course, we admire the NHS, amazing people working there and all that. And that's true of some of the other organizations. They are doing their best as regulators and advisors and whatever, but there's no joining up. And so that's why we need someone, as I was saying, who will be the golden thread, who would join this together. We'll see what's happening across the whole system, and not just the little pockets of good work, but across the whole system. And so that's really what's important. I'm sorry, very long answer. I'll be shorter in the future. The First Do No Harm Parliamentary Group, we're going to be launching it very shortly. We've got a website that we will put up. We want to bring pressure, particularly on the department, to ensure that they do respond. This is a very important report. And I don't say that because I led the report, but it is amazing, amazing the response we've had across the whole country, across the world. And people see it as something important. And yet the people who have got to implement it just are silent. And, you know, I'm working my socks off in the bill, trying to get answers to questions. And I get wonderful, warm words and no action. We need action.
Couldn't agree more. And I'm really hopeful that actually your report will be this moment for step change that we so badly need. The final question, really, I think to both yourself, Julia, and Aidan, is do you believe that the Patient Safety Commissioner should have a role that's wider than medicines and devices?
Well, shall I start? Or no, you've had enough from me. Aidan, why don't you have a go?
So I think anybody involved in patient safety, it makes sense for them to have a remit across. My own remit is clearly wider than just these specific issues around medicines and devices. And so anyone we engage with, I think it would be helpful to do that. I'm very clear, and I've had this conversation with Julia, that we are working very hard to make sure the patient voice is heard. Those who've read the patient safety strategy will know how it is threaded through that and how we take very seriously the work around making sure we work primarily. I noticed in the question somebody said patients coming last in the list, and if I appear to have put patients last in the list, it is absolutely not the intention. We have made significant steps to making sure that patients are involved in everything we do, and it's been hugely valuable doing so. And that's why it's absolutely part of the work we're doing. And so we are creating a whole structure around the patient voice as part of that strategy, as well as patient safety specialists who they will link to within the system. And so if there is to be a patient safety commissioner role, that can integrate intimately with all of that. And yes, I would see it as being valuable for that to take in the voice of all patients, not just specific to particular issues.
Thank you very much, Aidan, for that. I'm delighted for your support. Can I just say, you asked then whether we should go beyond just the areas that we're talking about. We've started off with mesh because that's where we've seen, in a way, some of the problems that we think we could address through a patient safety commissioner. But we've also said that further on, we would hope this person would then go into Valprade and so on. But we have to start with something that's doable. And I've been asked this question before, and my answer really is, you have to go to the moon first before you get to Mars. You know, you've got to start quite specific, focused. And then I think we could certainly, once the thing is bedded down, then it's up to the Patient Safety Commissioner to see how to expand it. And the model we've taken is the Children's Commissioner. We've been very impressed with Anne and the way that she has spoken for children who are not listened to, who are not heard. And she has been their champion. And we need a patient's champion. And this is this person, the independent, and independent is the most important word, the independent Patient Safety Commissioner. And so we think that this is really something that would make a huge difference, and it would give a chance for patients to be heard, for someone to monitor the whole healthcare system, to see what's happening across the whole piece. And we can see a really important role that would improve safety and would give patients a voice, which they really haven't had in the past.
Julia, thank you so much. I genuinely could not sum up the whole of that session any better. So I'm afraid we do have to finish there. To everybody listening, you're most welcome to continue commenting in the conference chat room and of course on Twitter. Our thanks again to the session partner, NHS Supply Chain, and of course to our brilliant speakers, Susan Morgan, Julian Cumberledge, Joe Gander, and Aidan Fowler. Thank you all so much. We are going to take a break. Do remember that there are resources in the exhibition hall to go and have a look at. The next session is supporting patients and family after unsafe care, the impact of good engagement when things go wrong. And that will start at 10:10. Thank you all so much.